you so much. It's so nice to be here. I'm so excited for this first partnership and first event between The Wing and Masters of Scale. For everyone online, this is a beautiful room here. And for everyone in the room, and anybody who's just coming in, feel free to come up and get comfortable. This is such a sweet, intimate space up front. For everyone who's online, know that we have, I was about to say secret spies. I'm not sure that's the right word, but our colleagues are in chat and watching what you're saying and watching your questions. So anyone online who has a question as we go along, share it, because when we open up for questions in the room, we will also be taking questions from chat, and we'll look forward to that. So I am going to invite up here in just a moment my dear old friend, Kiri Hart, who has already been introduced. Kiri is an independent film producer. She's a longtime screenwriter and also a film creative executive. And so she has this really interesting combined experience in Hollywood. I can't think about Kiri now, even though I've known her for years and years, without thinking about her role overseeing the last Star Wars trilogy, and everything came out of that, from the merchandise to the theme parks to the games. And then since then, as was just shared, was the executive producer on both Luca and Soul for Pixar, and has a number of new films in development. We might touch on one or two of them as we go. But I don't want to say another thing before bringing her to the stage. So please welcome my dear friend, the amazing Kiri Hart.
Hello.
Kiri.
Hi.
Your chair.
Thank you. Oh, I hope I can get up there.
I know.
Challenge. Okay, I did it.
It's so funny. There's always that moment. It's funny, and we've talked about this a couple times in my years at TED. We would joke that in public speaking, you know how the old joke about Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, that she did everything he did backwards and in heels. It's the same for women in public speaking. And sometimes when you walk to the stairs, you're like, how am I going to get up those stairs?
That's right. You need somebody to hang on to.
All right, so Kiri, as you come, so first of all, Kiri, I will share at the beginning, you will feel a familiarity between us, because Kiri and I have known each other since our freshman year in college. And I had to say that this room, so those of you who are online and not in the room, this is a gorgeous room at the Wing. It's beautifully appointed, and it's so relaxing to look at, and it actually looks exactly like Kiri's dorm room freshman year. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I took a little longer in my life to come into my grace. My dorm room was spilled coffee and overdue library books and undone laundry. It's true. It's true. And Kiri's was uplighting and downlighting and perfectly placed cushions. So.
I don't know if it was that perfect, but we did have good lighting. Well, I will vouch for that. But this room is great. Thank you for having us here. It's really lovely. It's beautiful.
All right, so Kiri, I want to start. So those of you who know Masters of Scale know there are always some stories in the mix. And this is not a classic Masters of Scale interview. We're here to really talk about creative leadership in particular. And when we say creative leadership, and I think of Kiri, I think of definitely of leading creative teams who are in explicitly creative fields, like creating incredible films and theme parks. But the truth is, any kind of business, when you're doing something that's new, is essentially creative. You're creating something that didn't exist before. And so there's so much to learn for anyone in any field about creative leadership. But as we start, I wanted to start off with a story. And to tell you the truth, it's actually a story I just learned in the green room, because I had either didn't know or completely forgot the story.
There are still things we can learn about each other.
I love that. So when I think of Kiri at Star Wars, at Lucasfilm, I think of her as overseeing the last trilogy films, and then all of the extensions into theme parks, merchandise, games. But she reminded me that it didn't start that way. So when you first came to Lucasfilm, it had not yet been acquired by Disney, and your purview was somewhat narrower.
Yes,
so tell me what you
narrower.
came to Lucasfilm to do.
I came to Lucasfilm to develop one Star Wars movie, maybe some more, depending on sort of how it went. And then I went off on maternity leave, had my son, and came back. And the day that I came back from maternity leave, my boss pulled me aside and said, the company is being acquired by Disney. So that was not what I had expected when I took the job. I was a lifelong Star Wars fan and felt hugely lucky just to be able to get involved in what Lucasfilm was going to be doing, but I had no idea that we were going to be asked to kind of build and scale the team that we then had to build and scale for the things that came next.
Totally. And and actually, Kiri, just share for a moment, because I knew this about you because we shared this love of Star Wars, but can you just talk for a minute about like the excitement at taking that role, or like how you felt about taking it?
Certainly. I felt amazing. I was so, I had worked for Kathleen Kennedy for a while, and she was going to go and run Lucasfilm, and I was invited to come with her. And, it was this really interesting moment in my life where a lot of things kind of converged. My love of film and of developing film collaboratively with other people, my love of Star Wars, which was lifelong from the time I saw the movie when I was 7 years old. And also my love of the Bay Area, which for those who are not familiar with it, is just a particularly lovely place in California, where as a person who does film, you don't really expect to be able to work. There's not a lot that goes on there in the film business, but Lucasfilm was very purposefully placed by George Lucas in the Bay Area to be different and to kind of, just to have its own culture and really sort of stand apart from the sort of normal Hollywood system. And so there was something about, and June and I had gone to college in the Bay Area, and so there was something to come back to there that I had loved. So it was kind of this amazing convergence of a lot of things that I loved at one time. I felt very lucky.
So I want to talk for a minute about taking on that role of, like when I think about stepping into that role, both when you stepped into that role at Lucasfilm and then also taking on productions at Pixar, like it's hard to think of two institutions or two brands that are sort of more storied or more beloved than creating a Star Wars movie or a Pixar movie. Like, the expectations are so high, the pressure is so high, and it feels like it would be so easy for you or anyone on your team to become paralyzed by the pressure. Mm-hmm. So talk to me a little bit. So I know you long enough, you are very cool under pressure, but how do you guide a team through that, through not being...
Same.
To take on something that is lofty and pressure filled without getting paralyzed by it? How do you coach a team through it?
I think that the thing that we had going for us at both places is the deep affection that people feel for the thing that they're working on, and that is something that you really cannot put a price on. It makes everything different. I think there's so much work that goes on in our business or any business for all kinds of different reasons. And when you are able to assemble a team to actually work on something that they love, you get a completely different gear from them, and you get a completely different type of kind of investment and engagement. And I think that both brands are so powerful for people because they represent a kind of story that pulls you in, that makes you feel something. At Pixar, there's this thing of like, have we made them cry yet? Because that's what they expect, right? So I think that is the thing that both places share is this real the good fortune that both companies have to kind of attract people that love what they make. Mm-hmm. And therefore, when they are under pressure, which we all are at different moments, and these movies are hugely expensive, they happen on very tight timelines, there is a lot of pressure for the different teams. I think that is one of the things that carries them through, is just that the purity of their love for what they're doing, their belief in what they're doing, and the value of the thing they want to put out into the world, the feeling of connection that they have with the people who are waiting for that story. And so that to me is like what you tap into. Now, that doesn't mean that people don't have, really scary moments, panic happens, all of those things happen. But I think as a leader of a team like that, or as someone who's helping to motivate and drive a team like that, what you want to come back to is, let's remember how much we love this and how much we want to get it right. And I think that for the kinds of people that you want to have working with you, that will unlock something for them a lot of times. It's just a way for them to start to kind of get their eyes off themselves and whatever they feel like their personal stakes are, and get more focused on the audience and on the story that they're telling.
It's so interesting. I never thought about it that way. It's almost like their passion and love for it is a counterbalance to the pressure. Like it's both what creates the pressure, but it like gets them through.
Weirdly, I think it actually a lot of times does help people, because I feel like it's the pressure sometimes is more. I know for myself, it's much harder when I don't feel like I have a connection to something. If I don't understand my connection to it, if I don't understand why I'm doing it or just what it means to me, then that's a place where I feel more disconnected as things become increasingly, pressure filled. But if you kind of know what your own connection to something is, I think that actually helps you stay really focused and reminds you of the fact that you're making something for other people, which is really kind of what it keeps coming back to.
Totally.
In the storytelling of it all.
It's so interesting because I wouldn't have thought of that, but it seems essentially true, right? That in some ways it's easier to lead a team with super high stakes who are passionate about it than like low stakes where they don't care about it.
No, that's right. I mean, one thing I've found at both companies that has, and it's interesting, they're sister companies because Pixar came from Lucasfilm. So there's real DNA that connects them. They're quite different culturally, but they do have these equally high sort of, kind of standards of what people are chasing and what they want from their work. And I think that for me, it's a joy, when you come to a place like Pixar and you haven't worked there in the past and you're asked to kind of help, lead and motivate a group of people. One thing you never have to worry about is, do they care about this? Like 100% they do. They are giving 150% of their considerable expertise to, everything they do. And so that is a wonderful feeling. You don't ever have to ask people to dig deeper because they're already doing that. And so then it's really just about how do we focus that energy in the right direction to make sure that we're doing the right things that will actually help the story get told in the right way. But there's not a lack of will or energy or investment, which is really special, and not every company is like that.
Totally. And we'll come back later. You have a lot of wisdom on kind of what creatives need and what creative teams need, which we'll come back to. But I'm going to give you a minute to put that tea bag in that cup.
I can talk while doing that.
After your long
It's
flight
okay.
today. I'll give a little lead in to this, which I was going to do anyway, which is, so you arrived at Lucasfilm
with my 2-month-old.
With your 2-month
in tow, yes.
With the 2-month-old and a new an acquisition by Disney, and suddenly your role has shifted, right? You went from doing a movie or two, which was high pressure but well within what you've done before, to suddenly being
no
like,
timeline, by the way. That part didn't have a timeline. The couple movies, it was just kind of like we were going to do it on the whatever timeline made sense, as opposed to.
Oh, right, and with Disney coming in, that would shift.
Yeah.
Right. So, well, and actually, let me ask you a question before, as you take your first sip of tea. So, Kiri, you came to do what? If they had Kathleen Kennedy had said to you, instead of like, Kiri, come to Lucasfilm, move to the Bay Area, let's do a movie or two, let's do a Star Wars or two. If she instead had said, come oversee the whole trilogy along with the theme parks, merchandise, VR, games, and so on, what would you have said?
I would have said no. I think
you would have said no.
I just think I wouldn't have understood that. I think that it was one of those things where you were just like, well, it feels pretty big just to start again, just to begin like honoring this incredible legacy of Star Wars, all that it has meant to 2 generations of fans, and its incredible founder and everything that he represents, both as a storyteller and a filmmaker in the Hollywood community. It's like one of those things where just to begin to kind of ramp that back up would have felt like a lot. I think that, but this is important. We were talking about this, that sometimes the reason that you're able to succeed is because you didn't actually sign up for the thing that you end up doing.
It's so true.
And if you had been asked to, you would have been like, well, say that again? That sounds crazy. But when you kind of move towards it sort of incrementally and with the help of people who you begin to collaborate with and trust, you can really start to see your way to scaling something that in the beginning might have felt overwhelming. And I think in my case, I was really lucky that I had so many great people who were around me, and also who I was able to pull in and hire, that it started to feel like, we absolutely can scale to meet the sort of new mandate, because we have like-minded, passionate people.
Totally.
I think it's important sometimes, you just say yes to the thing that's in front of you, and where that will lead, you don't know, and it's probably good that you don't. You can just step into it, do the work that you can see to do, and then see how it goes from there. And I think there are times when, once you have momentum on something creative, you can feel that it is possible for it to extend or expand.
Yeah. So this next question builds on that, Kiri, and it's fun. It's fun for me to ask, because first of all, leading in, those of you who listen to Masters of Scale have heard one of our hosts, Reid Hoffman, say many times that one of the most important things to do is talk to people about an idea, get advice, go to your network, talk to people. And you and I have done a lot of that over the years, back and forth in different things and at different times. And it's fun for me to remember, because I remember the conversations that Kiri and I had when your purview of your role was first expanding, and you're kind of coming to this realization it's not just about the movie. I have to think about this whole universe.
Yes.
The whole universe that's going to inform theme parks and VR and games, and those are in development now for years down the road. And we had a number of conversations along with Darren, my co-founder. This is part of our DNA at Masters of Scale as well. We have a podcast, and we expand to a show, and we expand to a book and an app. So we're always thinking about those extensions. I can think about that conversation now, but now coming back to here, it's fun for me because now I ask Kiri for her advice on how she did it so well, right? And so I'm so admiring and interested in the way you thought about the extensions from Star Wars. We'll stay on Star Wars for a minute, and we're going to come to Pixar and other films soon. But you had this way of looking at it, of talk to us a little bit about how you got your head around the extensions, but also how you made sure that they mattered, how you made sure that the quality of everything that was created around you was at the level that you wanted and the level that upheld the brand.
Well, I think the main thing I had going for me in that respect was that I was a Star Wars fan, and I loved it, and I had consumed it in different forms over the years myself. So I had a really strong sense of what the pleasure of that was, how that experience augmented in this really wonderful way the filmmaking, the film itself, and the experience of watching the film. And so I kind of think that was instinctive to me, that there was a way that you could sort of come into the Star Wars universe by way of different doors, and that those doors could be a book or a game or a toy, and that all of those were kind of, in my opinion, equally viable ways to start to understand the story, the big story of Star Wars. And so I think that for me it gave me sort of that sense of part of what I can do is just follow that sense of what would be enjoyable to me, because I've been doing this already. That being said, I was older and part of the sort of first generation of Star Wars fans, and there was a whole generation of Star Wars fans who grew up on the prequels and who loved those movies, and I wanted to make sure that we attended to them and the things that they cared about. And I knew that I had less personal knowledge of that part of the story, not because I hadn't seen those movies, but just because I hadn't been a kid watching those movies 20 times in the way that you do, right? So that was important to kind of excuse me, to make sure that we started to then fill out and flesh out the team with people who had the equal amount of love and sort of passion, but also were of different age groups, and sort of could, between all of us, if we got around something, we could sort of 360 look at it and feel okay, if we're all happy with it, it's got a good chance of kind of making its way with Star Wars fans. So that, I think it was this mix of my own experience, but then knowing that there were places where obviously my own experience was going to be thin, and I needed to actually solve for that with the team members that I was going to bring on. And I think, the other thing is we care a lot and always cared a lot about partners, the partners that were going to help us build these things, whether they were games or the theme park or whatever. And I think we looked for the same things in those partners that we looked for in our own team, which was people who really understood what was special about this, who wanted to keep it special, who understood the sort of perils of trying to scale something and make so much content and so many products while also maintaining a certain sense of what it needs to mean to people. And so that was like this really sort of difficult thing of just making sure that we were like-minded with the partners that we were in business with. And that's not always easy to do because obviously those are big companies and there's a lot of different players. And but I think that attention to that detail was already at Lucasfilm when I got there. I didn't have to create that because that was something that George and the teams of leaders that had built Lucasfilm understood, that all of this stuff needed to be integrated, that all of it was meaningful, that all of it needed to meet their own standards. And I think that was just really, our job was to try to keep that true in light of the fact that we were now part of a big corporation that was going to start to look for more and more from us. And so that was the kind of the new challenge, was like, how do we protect that actually? Because that's already in existence here in the company, this set of standards. But how do we keep those true as we are asked to partner with more and more people and asked to kind of do, a lot of different things. But like the theme parks were a perfect example of an amazing partnership that we made with the Imagineers at Disney. That was, I can't say enough about what a wonderful partnership that was. And it was because of so much alignment around both how much we wanted it to work, how special we wanted it to be for people. We were constantly talking about that. And then also, how much all those team members on the Imagineering side loved it and wanted it to be great.
Totally, and I feel like there's like two things that jump out at me, Kiri, that I take away from that. One is, I think there's like a beautiful insistence in what you described on your partners loving the brand. Like that every partner you work with had to love Star Wars and understand what it meant to people. We've actually changed a few things we do at Masters of Scale and Wait What because of that. I'm looking at Lori in the audience. We're working together on our Masters of Scale Summit that we like deliberately spent time as we brought new partners onto that team of like immersing in like, why do people love Masters of Scale? What does it mean to them to have that sense of it? Inspired by the way you describe these partnerships on Star Wars, like, yes, it's business, but you have to love it. Like, if you don't love it, then we can't work with you.
And I think, and I was really inspired by executives who were already at Lucasfilm. Howard Rothman was one of them, who ran all of consumer products and so many things that went on in that space. And he was great at building relationships. And I think that's the thing, is that it was really about understanding that these partnerships are relationships, and therefore they have to work like relationships, and you have to actually take the time to get to know companies and what they care about, what their own culture is, and whether it's a fit. And sometimes you don't have that time, or it doesn't feel like you have that time. So you have to try as hard as you can to use the time you have to figure out whether there's enough of a connection there that you can really make something special together.
Totally. All right, Kiri, I'm going to ask you a fun question in a different direction. I would like you to tell me about your very favorite Masters of Scale episode.
Bill Gates. Yes, Bill Gates, 1 and 2.
Both parts.
Both parts. No, I guess there's a lot of things I really learned from listening to those episodes, and something specific that jumped out at me that was really cool and just helpful at the moment that I was in. And it's related to this thing about partnerships, actually, is when he was talking about IBM as an early client of Microsoft's, and that feeling of like, oh my God, these guys are so much bigger than us. It's kind of overwhelming. Maybe we can't live up to what they need from us. Should we, and he made this observation, and again, I'm paraphrasing, but like, just that by having that partnership, they were sort of forced to level up and really understand how to be great partners, because that was what was demanded of them by such a high level client. And I think what that opened up or unlocked for me was just this idea that you need to kind of run at the sort of most challenging relationship that you can build, because that is actually what will make you stronger and will kind of demand of you things that you might not think you're ready for or might not think that you can actually do. And I found that very inspiring, and I've really found a lot of different ways that it applies to my own work, because I think that sometimes we limit ourselves or think that we're not ready for something that actually could be the thing that helps us become great. And so, yeah, I dug it.
I love that idea, running at the partnership that will make you better. Like
Yes.
the thing that's hard that will make you great.
And that was really, I don't know, I thought that the way he talked about that just was very vulnerable and real, and it made me feel like I really connect to that.
And it's interesting too, right? Because a lot of organizations are kind of allergic to partnership or allergic to those alliances. They think like, oh, this company doesn't get us. This company wants something from us that's not natural. They're pushy. They're impossible. Whatever it is. But it's like the flip of that. It's like embrace it and let them make you better.
Yes.
It's very cool. Talk to me about. So I'm going to quote you at you. In fact, I didn't even realize that was going to be there. But nothing creative is ever wasted. Quote from Kiri from a conversation we had this summer that really stuck with me, and actually stuck with a lot of people on my team, as I told you earlier tonight. We were talking about both creative failures, like how do you deal with creative failures, and how do you know when it's time to walk away from a project when you put everything into it? And again, part of the language we're using here is the language of creativity. Maybe it's a film or a pilot or a direction, but the truth is, again, any time in business that you're creating something new, it's essentially creative. You're creating something that didn't exist before, and it's really hard to pack it in when it's not working, or to call it. And just talk to us a little bit about how you think about that and how you lead teams through that when it happens.
It is really hard to walk away from something that you've put a lot of investment into. I think I do believe that creative work is not wasted. And I guess what I mean by that is that there's two things that happen when you're collaborating with people. You're working your own muscles, but you're also learning a lot about collaboration and what the give and take of that is. And I think that those are good skills to build no matter what. So those things, whether the project itself reaches completion or whether it doesn't, are really important things for anyone who's creative to be working on, is that sense of like, not only my own process, but how to incorporate another person's process into mine, or how to partner and genuinely get the most from the other person, so that partnership is not one of obligation. It's actually one that actually is creating a better thing as a result of the two working on it, as opposed to just the one. So I think there's that. I think there's just the simple kind of like muscle memory of that. I think the other thing is that relationships are a huge, huge part of creativity, and trusting relationships, because obviously creative work is very vulnerable work, and therefore what matters to creative people is safety and a sense of safety. And a lot of times you can build that very effectively even on a project that doesn't go forward, just because you realize that like you've met your people, you've met your creative tribe, you've met the people that you have some kind of special connection with, and you've felt it, and it's real. And whether this goes forward or whether it doesn't, that is real, and that can carry you forward into the next thing. And I think that those are hugely important things, and you really can't, you probably will have projects that don't pan out that give you those things that are honestly equally important. So that's one thing. And then I think the other thing, the question of just sort of like, how do you help a team get through the decision for something to get shut down, or to walk away from something, and how do you make the decision to walk away from something? I think the clearest thing to me about walking away from something is asking yourself, is this something that I can achieve any kind of momentum on? Like, I think that's a really clear way to kind of measure, when you feel that you're sort of swirling and you're stuck and the team is struggling, like, if you as the leader of the team cannot see a way to move forward, and you've kind of like considered all the angles, and you've gone to your people that you trust, and you've asked, am I missing something? Do I have a blind spot? Like, and no one really has that thing that feels like it's going to unlock getting momentum. in my opinion, that's a time to walk away and stop burning the resources of your team. I think that things like that can come back. And you want to kind of sort of like, ideally, if you shut them down, shut them down in such a way that they can be revitalized, right? At the right time with the right people and the right moment. Timing is important. Money is important. The mandates of your bigger corporation that you're part of or your company that you're part of are important. So there's all kinds of reasons that something can come back to life. And you should put it away in a way that if it needs to come back to life, it can. But that being said, I think that if you really have exhausted all of the ways that you can see to possibly create momentum on something, that is a reason to shift your energy to something that you can push forward.
I love that.
And so I think that helps people, right? Because when you're talking about how do you lead the team through it, it's just like, does anyone see a way that we can push this forward? And if everyone's like, I don't, then that's your answer. And we can all feel bad about it, and of course we will. But that's at least very clear, right? And a huge part of managing a team is understanding this team is expensive. It's a resource. I am responsible for what I'm aiming it at. If I don't do that work correctly, we could go in a direction for a long time that burns a lot of energy and break a lot of people's hearts, right? So like there's emotion involved, there's people's livelihoods involved, and so it is actually your responsibility to kind of ask those questions and be real about the answers. But I think that helping people understand what the value is of the thing, post-mortem, I'm a huge believer in, right? Sitting and talking about like what went right, what went wrong. Let's put it on the whiteboard. Like let's really dive into that so that when people walk away from something that didn't get completed, they still have a sense of what they're taking with them.
Mm-hmm. I think that's so smart, both the clarity of it, the honesty of it, and then also the reminder that it's not wasted. Mm-hmm. We actually did get something out of this. We got relationships, we got processes, we got ideas to take forward.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of great things actually, if you go and ask people, come from other things that didn't work out, right? Where they end up feeling like, wow, if we hadn't all worked together on this other thing that didn't pan out, then I wouldn't have known to call them when I had this other thing that did pan out. Like, it's like, and you can really go back and look and track that. I think in a lot of cases when you're looking at something really successful, there's probably a couple failed things underneath it, right? That sort of built its foundation.
I love that. Kiri, let me ask you about, there's something you shared with me, maybe it was like 6 or 8 months ago. We were talking about that has stuck with me that I want to share. So we were talking at the time about, it's another show that we make at Wait While called Spark and Fire, which is on the creative
awesome
journey.
Show. Check it out.
Yes. And creativity is really the same thing as innovation, right? Just different words, different fields. And in talking about it, we were unpacking some of the lessons from a few of the episodes. And I was asking Kiri about just how does she think about with different creatives that she's worked with, both helping them to get started and helping them get unstuck. And you said something that always stuck with me. You were like, well, these aren't your words, these are mine, but she was basically like, that's table stakes. Like the truth is that's what separates creative professionals who make it from those who don't. It's not necessarily talent, it's their ability to get themselves started and to get themselves unstuck. Get yourself started and get yourself unstuck. And like that's what will distinguish you and help you succeed. And talk to me a little bit about that, but also Kiri, I think from the lens of, in all of the projects you work on now, you are kind of in the role of helping people get started and get unstuck. Let's talk to us a little bit about that.
So producing is hugely about putting together the sort of foundational elements of a project. And that can be the talented people who are going to write and direct and produce it. It can be the idea itself. It can be the right people to finance it. So your job is really to kind of be that person who fits the initial pieces together and then builds a process and a sort of like, a sort of a road for the thing and starts to push it down that road. So the early part of it is really about this idea of kind of like putting the right things together and then, yes, pushing, getting behind it and pushing until it starts to roll. And I think that, it's a lot easier to get people started when they have some self-awareness about their own process. And that sounds funny, but it's actually really true, which is just that some people don't. And they're not sure how they made the thing that they made that sort of gave them the opportunity to keep making creative things. Maybe it happened sort of by accident or in a way that they can't quite articulate or they're not really sure. And I think that it's not necessarily that those people can't make something else or do something else, but when we're talking about what it takes to kind of assemble the right combination of things and then again push something until it starts to roll on its own, it has its own momentum, that is greatly helped by creative people who are self-aware about what they need and can tell you, so that you as a person who's trying to resource this whole thing to go can say like, what do you need? And they can answer you. And they may not have every answer, but they have something, right? I think that in my experience has really made a huge difference in my ability to come alongside somebody and help them get their story told. It really is a thing that I look for and kind of actively sort of probe to see if I can get to early on in building relationships with creatives and with people who might be on a creative team, because I need to know that they know what they need enough that I can help them, right? So if they can say some of what that is, then we can work with that. And it can be something unconventional, it could be something that we don't usually do, that's okay with me. I really just want to understand how they begin. And so the more, as an artist, as a creative person, the more you can get to know that about yourself. And whether that's by trying things or whether that's by journaling or dialoguing with someone about it, but whatever it is, to really get to that place where you're like, I know how I need to begin. I know the circumstances that I need. I know the elements that I need. I need this person. I need to go away for a while. I need to, be with lots of people. Like there's literally all kinds of different answers to that question. But it's about having that answer so that when somebody comes along and says, I'd like to help you, what do you need? You answer, right? I think that when we're talking about people getting unstuck, this is sort of the other piece of self-awareness, which is you will get stuck, right? So there's no version of not getting stuck or getting to some place of like excellence where you just sort of, slide through the whole process and you never get stuck. That doesn't happen. So on the biggest movie, the smallest movie, whatever it is, you are going to get stuck. And the question is, what happens then? A lot of people spiral is what happens, right? They do, and they kind of they don't know how to stop their free fall. You have to learn how to stop your free fall. You have to learn how to figure out what is it that for me, it's interesting. It's true in life, right? Which is just sort of like I say this to my 9-year-old all the time, which is like, what would make you feel better right now, right? It's the same question. The same question. So it's just like, what would help you recover? What would make you feel better? I think that when you're in a creative spiral, a lot of times it's about self-doubt and sort of this feeling that there's something obvious to other people that you can't see or whatever it is. So like trying to figure out, recognizing that you've been at those places before, you found your way through them. How did you do it, right? Go back and look, ask yourself, write it down, and then start to understand how you can build a scaffold for yourself or a support network of other people that you can activate when you get in that place, because we all get there. And the question is what will you do then? And I really do feel that, as we've talked about, June, that when we're talking about professional grade creativity, right, that has to kind of like work on timelines and with big budgets and all the things, it really makes a difference that you have the ability to say, okay, I realize I'm stuck, and here are some things that would help me. So that then again, a person like me can be like, I will go and get those things. Also, I've been doing this long enough that I can probably lob some things at you too. Like, hey, have you tried this? Maybe we should do this. Let's do a whiteboard session. Let's go on a retreat. Let's do it, whatever the things are. But like coming from the creative themselves, some beginning of how to sort of like dislodge the block is really, really important. And I think it's something you can get better at by just knowing that you need to, right? That you need to have, that's a tool that you've got to put in your toolkit.
I love that so much. I'm just going to do time check. Do we have like 5 minutes before questions, or are we slipping to questions, Jodine? Okay, so first of all, everyone on the live stream, if you have a question, go ahead into chat and drop it to us and we will share it. We're going to come to questions in a minute, and Jodine will tell us how. But I have a quick follow-up for Kiri, which is, I think and this is for everyone, like when I hear you talk about creativity, so I think that first of all, I found that even though I've worked my whole career leading creative teams, that some of just the language you use about getting started and getting unstuck and the self-knowledge that's required is so freeing. But I would also build on that I actually think I see this kind of the need for self-knowledge and the importance of getting started and getting unstuck in like everyone on my team, right? I see it in the engineers, and maybe with engineers they get stuck because they're too distracted and they don't have enough focus time to get momentum. And maybe people on the business development and marketing side are getting stuck because they're not getting answers back, and so they don't have momentum.
Yes.
And so there's something I think also just really interesting in applying some of those lessons about creativity and seeing like how that plays out across everyone.
Everyone in every part of business can be creative. Let's just say that. That's super important. I'm talking about movies because that's what I do, but this is about the fact that no matter what job you do, you can be approaching that job either from a place of kind of cynicism that it sort of is what it is, or curiosity and creativity that it can be something else, that it can be more. And I think that if you are approaching it from that place and you want to build, right, you have a desire to build things, then yeah, you need to understand your own process.
I love that. All right, I think it's time to take questions.
Yes, it is.
Jodine.
All right.
Yep. Okay. I got the first question.
This question is coming from is this coming from?
It's not coming from me.
Okay.
The chat, I don't know if you guys can hear me.
No,
The
you're not. I don't think.
chat is, okay. The chat is so alive right now. Like they're just like the questions are flying, and I'm like, wait. It's so much happening on the chat right now. This question is for this question is for Kiri. When collaborating creatively, how do you balance empowering the voices and the ideas of teams and individuals and leading them where you think they should go? And I'm going to put this over here while you think about that so people can ask questions in the room.
Okay, so roles on the team voicing their thoughts and feelings, opinions versus me trying to herd it in a direction. I think I maybe just answered the question. I think, part of the privilege of leading a team is that you believe as their leader that they are creative. And part of your pleasure of coming to work every day is seeing what they're going to come up with. And so for me, I really love sitting at the table with the team and hearing everything that they want to do and think is good to do and feel. And there are times I don't have to do anything except just then put action to the things that they're talking about, right? So it's like, okay, these are all great things. What is the order of events? What's the way that we're going to do these things? If you have a great team that really you've built in the way that I got to build mine, which was literally person by person, and it was a pleasure. You sometimes that's it. Like you're really, there are times where one of them would say, I'd like to do this. And I'd say, well, that sounds great. I think you should go do it. What do you need from me? And they would usually, again, be able to tell me, which was great, right? Because you want to be able, as the leader and the manager, to resource them. So, sometimes that balance is easier to strike because of that, because you have a real faith in the people that are working with you, and you really just want to empower them. And if they're kind of like-minded, even though they may come from very different backgrounds and different points of views, if they've aligned around something, then sometimes it's just about resourcing and sort of creating action steps for that thing that they can see to happen. So that's super exciting when that happens. And that can be a filmmaking team. It can be a creative team, development team like the one I ran at Lucasfilm. It can be all kinds of different types of teams where you're just there, you're listening, and then seeing, sort of picking out from what's being said, the things, curating a little bit, right, from what's being said, and then saying, like, here's the plan of action that comes from that. So that's one way. I think, I always have a very firm point of view creatively on what I think we should do. But I think that the part of the job that is really, again, enjoyable to me is hearing other people and allowing myself to be influenced by that. So, if there's a way that I absolutely think it needs to go, I'm certainly not hesitant to say what I think that is or to decide if that needs to be done. But I would rather have a conversation about it with the team and arrive at something together, because in my experience, that motivates the team in a totally different way. I can dictate to them, and sometimes just out of respect and love even, they would do something that I say, we're gonna do this. It's much, much better though, to have actually pulled everything you can out of them and then arrive at something that you can get everybody aligned around. Sometimes it's your job to be the person who figures out what the compromise is. And that is also about just having done this long enough that you can kind of be like, okay, I think hearing all of that, the best way is this. And it hopefully incorporates as much as it can from the things that people are bringing. But I really think that forcing yourself as a leader of a team to hear everyone and at least go through the process of conversation about things before you sort of default to whatever it is that you came to the meeting with in the back of your head. You were like, it's this. And then, we've all been in rooms where you're like, this whole thing is an exercise. The person already knows what they want to do, right? I really don't want to create meetings like that. I want the meeting to count for something, that it is actually a conversation that we're all having together, that I can be influenced by, that other. And if you do that, then you have the sort of like credibility as the manager of the team. It only comes from having genuinely been willing to engage everybody. And I think that's, over time, super important that you get that. So, it's actually part of what's lovely about being in that kind of role, is to really see what bubbles up and then try to figure out how to harness that.
Very cool. Jodine, do you want people coming up to the mic? Yes. So maybe anybody who you have a question you'd like to share will come up to the mic. Hello.
Hello. No. Oh no, that mic is bad.
That's all right. If we're having, share the question and we'll repeat it back, because we can hear you.
Hi.
Hi.
So lovely. This evening has been so lovely. Galaxy's Edge is phenomenal.
Thank you. That's the nicest thing you possibly could have said to me. So thank you.
I'm from the Orlando area, so I grew up with Disney World in my backyard. So when that opened, I got to the pandemic with my father, and it was a magical time. But my question circles back to the beginning of our conversation tonight about having passionate people on your team. And I wanted to ask you both, when hiring people for your team, how do you recognize that passion within them and make sure that they're the correct hire for the job?
Great question.
It is a great question. And those of you online might have missed at the beginning just the praise for Galaxy's Edge.
It is awesome.
Yeah.
Really love it.
You go first. I'll come behind.
Hiring people with passion, how do you do it? So I think one thing is not to shortcut the interview process. I believe in an interview team. I know that's a common thing, but I think it's really important to kind of figure out who are the right people to be on that team. They should be a very diverse group in terms of kind of their, in every way, like their age, their gender, their background, the work that they do for the company, so that you really are getting this well-rounded assessment of the candidate on multiple days, not just you and them having coffee where they're telling you everything they want, that they think you want to hear. Like, really work that process. And I think there are also, depending on the work that you're doing, questions that you can ask that can unlock that passion in someone. If you kind of know what those leading questions are, if you will, that are like, if you say to them, what if I told you that we were going to do X? And they go, oh my God, right? Then you're kind of like, okay, we're onto something here. Like, it's like, kind of keep going with that. And I think that, over the years, I've seen so many times where you can kind of give somebody that and they don't they put that bait out there and they don't take it. And that to me is really important for you as the person, looking for people on your team. You need to be able to sort of clearly articulate the culture of your team, how it works, what's important to you, and what isn't. But I think also to really try to develop those questions that you feel like help, that you have seen successfully unlock somebody who really loves something. And for each property or different type of storytelling, it might be different, right? But I can think of many times working on Star Wars where it was that simple thing of just, feeding somebody a couple things and having them respond in a way that made you go, oh my God, they're lit up, they're ready to talk, like you can feel it. So I think it's a combination of you really knowing how to articulate your mission in a way that's clear, and then also inviting them to talk about what that makes them feel, but also to really rely on your colleagues so that it's not just like your gut feeling. It's like you need multiple people to come away being like, that person belongs with, they're one of us. Like that, when they say that, right, I would always be like, okay, now I'm really listening if somebody says that. So those are some thoughts. I don't know, what do you think?
I love
Better
this.
at this than me.
No.
Yes,
But I totally agree. I think actually the diversity of the people who interview is something that's often overlooked, and in every way, because you're showing different parts of your organization to them. They're taking in who are the people who work here, and people react differently to different people. I always like to put someone who's very junior in front of a very senior hire to make sure that they're acting as respectfully and creatively with someone junior as they are to me. It's very easy to be fooled when you're the person who runs an organization by how someone acts toward you. I have there's two specific things I'd say on the passion front, though. For me, I'm the last interview always for everyone, and if by the time I interview them they're not in love with our content and our company, then they're not right. Like, so if they haven't spent time with it, if they're not feeling a magnetic pull, if they're not like lighting up with excitement talking about it, we're just not for them. They might be a great candidate, but they don't have the passion that we need. And I always ask two questions that sound silly or like throwaways. I always ask people what they're most proud of, and I ask them the conditions at work that when were they happiest at work, and what were those conditions? And I ask that to make sure that the role that I have for them is something that's going to deliver them pride and happiness, because you can also have someone who has the skills but who actually won't be happy or feel proud of their work with you, and then you won't have a match.
Yes.
Thank you both so much.
Is a great question.
Yeah, great
We
question.
think about it a lot, as you can tell.
That was awesome. Building on that a little bit, once you're working with people, and I have had the privilege of working with the Imagineers on a really small project, so you have engaged partners, but sometimes we're in groups where you don't have engaged people that you're working with and good collaborators. So can you share a time where you were in a meeting or in a project where everybody didn't really have a handle on the vision, and how you got people involved and engaged and contributing to the vision and the success of the project?
Great question as well. Yeah, it is hard when you are in some kind of meeting or some type of gathering where you feel like there's a kind of business as usual quality to everything, or people are kind of looking at their watches and they're kind of ready to be out of there. I think it is really important to be able to articulate on any project why it's important to do it. And I know that sounds stupid and basic, but it really matters. I think, especially in a corporate setting where so many things are happening at once, anytime you've scaled something to the place where it's like, oh my God, we have all these things happening. And there can be a kind of loss of the understanding of why any one thing is happening. It's just kind of part of the noise of all the stuff we're doing. And I think that to be able to, as a project manager or a leader or any team member, to really be able to kind of like stop and refocus people on why. Why are we doing this? And frankly, if we don't have that answer, then we probably shouldn't be doing it, right? So, and that is an answer in itself. So I think getting to that as a kind of like way to kind of, again, it's a compass, right, that you can use to kind of help yourself get back to like, okay, let's redirect the group. I think also energy-wise, I've found that, people get very serious, right? And especially when they're kind of like not engaged in something emotionally, it can just feel really serious and kind of dry. I like to keep it playful. I think that play is a very important part of the sort of culture of a creative place. And so that can mean just like keeping it light or making jokes or being the person who kind of keeps reminding everybody that there's a kind of craziness or silliness to some of this. Like just that perspective, I think loosens things up and kind of shakes people a little bit, and they realize like, oh, it's okay to play. And when you're in a playful space, you are in a creative space. So like, I think that's something that I try to inject into things so that there's a kind of, and it doesn't mean that we're not taking it seriously. It doesn't mean that we don't understand the stakes. It just means that in a creative meeting, there can be, again, you can edge towards paralysis, as we talked about earlier, if you're like, you kind of lost the sense of it and you're kind of, it's now just like feels like everybody's just sort of white knuckling it to get through it. So how do you kind of lighten it, make it more playful, and also remind people that there's a purpose at the center of it? You know, and if that doesn't work, then, you know, alcohol.
Perfect answer. Great question.
Hi, thank you so much for this. I mean, when I read the synopsis of what, you know, both of you, and then what would be covered, I wasn't sure what to expect, and it's been really delightful. So I have a couple of things. Well, one, Luca and Sol, my family, I have a 4-year-old, and we waited for both of those to come out. And the minute it went on the streaming platform, we were on it, and we've seen, I think, each of them at least 7 to 10 times.
Wow.
So we enjoyed them thoroughly. But my question is about Soul. Did you, with that project, did you know that it was going to be Soul?
What a good question. When I came onto Soul, it was already in process. The process at Pixar is quite long on these movies, and it starts with a filmmaker and a producer and a writer kind of, you know, working on something and iterating on it until they get it to a place where then storyboard artists are brought on board to actually flesh it out into what they call reels, which are sort of, it's just basically a very basic fundamental drawn version of the movie, right? So it's not animated yet, doesn't have any color, doesn't have the actors that are going to be in it, doesn't have music. It's just this very rudimentary, basic level of kind of what the story is. And this is the thing, this is the sort of wonderful thing of Pixar, of just this working and reworking those until they are at this place where then it feels like the story has been figured out to the point that animation can actually take place. So when I first saw Soul, it was in a very early state of reels, and I went to Pixar and watched it in the theater there, and I cried. I was so moved by it. I had always been a fan of Pete Docters. I had never met him. I thought he was a genius filmmaker, but I had never met him until that day. And I thought the movie was beautiful already in its sort of crudest form. And I knew that there were things that it needed, and there was going to be support that the team was going to need to make it its most authentic, true self. But there was already something there that was so imaginative and beautiful that I just came away feeling like I will do anything it takes to help that movie find its way into the world. So yes is the answer.
So engaging. So you answered some of this. I'm doing PhD research on burnout, anxiety, and creativity. So this is a huge can of worms that you cannot answer right now. But I just wonder, I mean, you mentioned being a new mom. In your opinion, one, do you have any recommendations for those of us that are in this creative space? Is there something you do to kind of help keep yourself centered? And then secondly, do you think age, gender plays into it in this day and age? I know that might be too much, but so maybe we just go with practices you suggest for us to fight burnout as creatives.
For people who are fighting burnout creatively. Yeah, I think one of the number one things I would recommend to somebody who's fighting burnout in their creative life is to get still, to slow down and stop multitasking and kind of juggling things and find an opportunity to be still. And most people are afraid of this, by the way. When you tell them this, they're like, they can't think of anything that sounds worse to them than that. And it's interesting because we all talk about how stressed we are. But then when somebody says, well, you know what, why don't you just take a couple days off? They're like, oh, no, I don't need a couple days off. I'm fine, right? And why is that? Because there's that feeling of like, I'm holding this whole thing up by just sort of rushing and running, right? And if I stop, maybe it's even worse than I think, right? Maybe it's even, it's like this, there's a sense of like, maybe I wouldn't get momentum back at all. But I really do think that a huge part of what saps people's creativity is just busyness. And there is real value in just slowing down, making some regular rhythms for yourself of how you can stop. Again, this is about self-awareness, which we talked about earlier, of like what helps me. So it's like, how do I, find a way to stop? I think I've, over the years, had different things that have worked for me that are literally as simple as just like carving out a quarterly retreat for myself, which is like by myself, just a couple of days, someplace that's easy to get to. Don't make it overly complicated for yourself. It's not a vacation. It's actually just a time to slow down. So those kinds of things for me have been really helpful. I feel like, I can feel when they slip away from me when I don't do them, how they impact me. And a lot of what I suggest to other people is about that. I think in this particular time that we're living in, it's just the constant bombardment of stuff and the feeling that you're never doing enough that can really sap your energy creatively and sap your kind of belief in yourself, because you just have this feeling of constant inadequacy that you're fighting all the time because there's so much that remains undone at the end of any given day. And so you have to kind of like step back from that and really sort of recalibrate around what is the work I'm trying to do, what do I get out of it, what's meaningful to me now, because that changes for us, right? As we age, as we have kids, as we do different things with our lives, like to kind of take stock with yourself of like, what has meaning for me now? What would I be, if I could choose to redirect myself, what would I be doing? Sometimes people lose touch with their creative desire, right? Because they're just so, again, they're pulled in so many different directions. So I think learning how to ask yourself some of those questions, check in with yourself, and make space to do that are all things that are helpful to me.
I feel like that's a perfect and complete answer, but I can't resist adding one thing to it
Yes,
that is
I want you to.
completely resonant with it, which is a very tactical thing that I've noticed in myself, in my family, and on my whole team, which is that it's much of what you said, Carrie, but the constant interruption. Yeah. And one thing to look at, like I'd encourage everybody here to look at, is look at the notifications that are bombarding you during the day. Because our devices, actually, even when you update your OS and things like this, all the notifications come back. I'm sometimes looking over Darren's shoulder, my co-founder and husband, I'm like, does this happen to you all day? Every 3 seconds, a new email, a Slack message, a new email, a news. It's not just that the content of those can be distressing and distracting. It's also that like we humans find great satisfaction in flow, whether you're naturally a creative person and you think of it as creative flow, or you're just connected to what you're doing and you're in flow. And if you're constantly having things pop up and interrupt you and take you out of that flow,
Never
it's really
achieve flow.
hard to be. You never achieve flow.
And I think then you start wondering if you can, right? And that's the thing. So it's like fighting that before it becomes this thing where it's a question that you're asking yourself all the time, can I even do it anymore? Which you see a lot of writers and people run up against this moment where they're like, I don't know if I still have it, right? And part of that is because of what you're talking about. They're never getting in the flow state, which does create confidence, right? Because you come out of it and you're like, whoa, look at all the things that happen. And if you can't get there ever, then you're not reminded of what that feels like.
Yeah. And it takes time.
Yeah.
I have a last question from. Here we go. Okay, there it is. Okay, so I have the last question from the live stream. Again, the live stream chat moderation has been on fire since you two have been talking. So I'm excited about that. But unfortunately, this is the last question. So this is for both June and Kiri. What's your favorite way to get unstuck? For both of you. And we'll end the Q&A
Go
here.
first?
Or maybe, actually, I'll go first because that way you have the last word. That's better.
Oh, that backfired on me. Okay, go ahead. All right.
I think two ways in totally different directions. My first way actually totally has to do with flow, with what we were just talking about. I came across this thing that sounds nutty. It is called the Pomodoro method. Google it. And it is this idea that it's this
PhD
method.
student knows it.
Yeah. It's called the Pomodoro method. The idea is that you, I won't go into detail on it, but that you give yourself 25 minutes straight of completely concentrated time on a task, and that 25 minutes is the length of one Pomodoro. Again, like Google it, it's a sort of a funny system. And in those 25 minutes, no interruptions. No checking Slack, no checking email, no getting up to go to the bathroom, no getting a drink, no nothing. And if you do that, that's okay. You just have to start over. You did not actually give yourself the 25 minutes to have a unit of time to get something done. And so when I'm stuck on something, it usually means that I haven't had enough time to concentrate and get it done. And so I block off all distractions, and I give myself, I'm like, all right, I need 2 Pomodoros to get this done. And and you're allowed 5 minutes in between a Pomodoro. And it's a crazy method, and it really helps me get centered and focused. But my opposite direction is sometimes that's not what I need. Sometimes what I need is stimulation. And then I'll go to a museum, or I'll go to a cafe, or I'll just go window shopping. I need movement, and I need visual stimulation, so that in many ways, so that my brain can shut off and I can find the creative answers by not focusing on it, by just looking for inspiration. So those are my two.
Yeah, those are
go-tos.
great. I feel like mine are similar. The one I would say, living in the Bay Area and having so much access to nature, just putting myself out in nature is a great way to get unstuck. I'll just say I'm just going to take a hike or a walk or whatever, or drive, and I'm not going to try to solve for this. It's like combination of nature and music for me are two things that then will sort of let whatever it is kind of just like sit back there and then kind of unlock itself naturally. But I think you do need to know when you're stuck that sometimes trying to crack it is the last thing you need. You actually do need to kind of just like take a big step backwards. And so I'll sometimes just say, like, if I'm really stuck on something, I'm just not going to think about this for a couple days. And during that time, I'm going to immerse myself in something else, whether it's another project or whether it's just, as I said, like going out and being in nature, whatever it is. But I think giving yourself permission to set it down, I guess, is one thing that I would say is really helpful.
I love that too. I guess we've reached the end of the time together. So, all right, so as we wrap up, so first of all, I want to say a huge thank you to The Wing. This has been like the most beautiful space to be in, beautiful audience, beautiful partnership. It's been so lovely. And thanks to the whole team here. Like, everyone has been so lovely. I won't name names, but everyone has been so lovely to work with. And then before I thank you, Kiri, I feel like I should share that, so Masters of Scale is created by the company Wait What. And Kiri is our latest board member. We actually have our first board meeting together tomorrow. And we are super delighted and proud to have you on our board.
Thank you. I'm
and
honored to
Kiri,
be on
you
your board.
flew, you like got up at 4 a.m. to get here.
You
in
got up at
time
like 4 in the
for
morning. Everybody got up at 4.
Not about me, it's about you. So you got up super early to fly here and get here on time.
I did. I'm so glad I did.
With
Thank you
us.
guys. I
And
hope
so
this was helpful.
Thank you so much to Kiri.